Hi, I'm Cass.
And I'm Annie, and welcome to Unashamed. We're so happy to have you guys with us today. This is our second video on our channel, and we are so pumped to do it. So if you guys have been following along with us with our website and with our first video, then you know that we kind of talked about what it means to be unashamed and what our mission is exactly with the website and the YouTube channel. So today in this video, Cassidy and I thought it would be a great idea to talk about the importance of living unashamed, not just what it is, but why we should apply it to our lives and how it can really help us grow in community with each other and grow closer with God. So of course, in order to know more about this importance and implementing it into our lives, we have to talk first about what exactly is shame and what is it to be ashamed of our lives. And so Cassidy is going to talk a little bit about that.
One of the things that comes to mind when talking about being ashamed is just feeling trapped in something that you don't want to be. So something that's being ashamed is something that is keeping you from what God truly wants you to be and being your true self. If you're trapped by being ashamed, you feel as though you have to pretend to be something else and that you can't, that you're unable to do what you truly want to do, what you're truly called to do. One thing that, an example of this in my own life is when I went to public school for my high school career. I was ashamed of my faith. I was ashamed of who I was because I just knew that the people around me just wouldn't agree with me. So whenever they talked about something that I didn't agree with, I would just keep quiet. And even when I knew that what they were saying was wrong, and I just kept my mouth shut. And that's something that's very shameful for me because I wasn't confident in my faith. And I knew that I was called to share my faith and be strong. I just felt trapped being someone that I wasn't. And I was ashamed of that. And I wasn't able to be who God wanted me to be.
When I think of shame, it's along the lines of being trapped, but I just get this vivid picture in my mind of just being chained down by shame. I just imagine these chain cuffs around my wrists, and whenever I'm ashamed of who I am and what my identity is, I just feel like I am just tied down and trapped. And I kind of have a similar situation along with Cassidy, even though I went to an all-girls Catholic high school. I vividly remember in the morning at my Catholic school, we would have this TV channel that we would all listen into. Each homeroom would listen into it, and we would pray this morning prayer together. And everyone at my high school, at least most people, would not join in on the prayer. And I always wanted to, but a lot of times I would refrain because I was afraid to show people who I was and kind of ashamed of who I was and afraid what other people were going to think of me if I joined in saying the prayer. And so I just kind of kept to myself for the longest time. Whenever we would pray this morning prayer in the morning, after I guess a little bit, I realized how trapped I felt. Like we were talking about how you just feel chained down. And I really felt like I was just not free. I was letting the views of other people at my high school kind of make me this person who just felt really trapped. And even though I really wanted to pray this morning offering in the morning, I just wouldn't. And so once I made the decisive choice to be okay, I'm going to pray this morning prayer. And really, I felt this shame. I was shameful that I would not speak up also, that I wouldn't say that. So I was ashamed in myself that I wasn't staying true to who I was. But once I realized that it doesn't matter what other people think, except what God thinks of me, then I was able to really let that go and to live so much more freely, even though it was hard. And that's why I always see shame as something that just traps you, because we are meant to live freely. We are meant to live freely in God's truth and in His word. And even though it's hard, it is so freeing. And shame is something that really keeps us down. But with shame and with being ashamed of who you are and the things that you do and the different things that you have that are unique to you, I just see it as us being chained to like this wall, and we're like trying to run to Christ, but we're just like getting stuck. We're just like stuck, and He's just waiting there for us. And so we just have to realize, like, I need to take off these chains. I need to realize that I can be free in Christ if I just let my shame go. And so then we can take off these chains and just run to Him.
Yeah. I think a good example for like from the Bible for like all the feelings and all the imagery that you explained is the story of Peter, how he denied Christ because he was ashamed, because he was afraid of what other people were thinking, because he was afraid that he was going to be put to death. And he was just afraid, and he was ashamed, and he just felt very trapped in his denial of Jesus. But like when he did decide to live for Christ, and he did decide to break free from that shame, he was able to live so freely. He was able to do what God wanted him to do. And he ended up getting martyred for Christ, but he was so free, and he was so free from shame, and just wanted to live for Christ, and was just like broke free from his chains and ran fully towards Christ.
I think also with that analogy, it's important to realize that when we sin, Satan kind of wants us to feel shame about that and to really beat up on ourselves. I think that's something that is also really important to talk about, is that when we sin, it's important to recognize our wrong and that we did wrong, but to feel extremely shameful about ourselves and just to beat up on ourselves is just gonna tear us apart. And I think going along with Peter's denial story is that he denied Christ and he was ashamed of himself, but he realized that he had to continue towards the good, that he couldn't just live in his shame and just keep beating up on himself. He realized that he needed Christ because he was not enough. He was going to fail and he was going to sin. And he had to just keep striving for Christ and realize that Christ can give him that freedom no matter what he has done. And I think it's important to recognize Peter's reaction to shame versus Judas Iscariot's reaction to sin and shame. Because Judas, the difference between Peter and Judas is that Judas sinned and he turned against God. But instead of realizing that God could overcome his sin and his shame, he instead just wallowed and turned in on himself and remained in shame and remained in his sin, beating himself up and tearing himself up about it. And we all know what happens to Judas is that he just kind of like tears himself apart and just can't take the weight of shame anymore. But with Peter, he was humbled enough and realized that he needed God to help him through his sin and through his shame, and that overall he just had to continue to go to Christ because that is who we need to turn to in our areas of our life where we are sinful and we are shameful, we just have to turn to Christ, because he is really the best remedy to help us in those times.
Yeah.
I don't know
I
what you have
think
to say about that question.
I think one of the most important things to like acknowledge with shame and being ashamed is that being ashamed is essentially focusing on all of the bad that you've done and focusing on the sin and just wallowing in that muck. Whereas being unashamed is acknowledging that what you did was wrong and that it was sinful, but focusing on the good, focusing on God, and taking the next step forward. So I think that's one of the reasons that it's so important to be unashamed, is that being unashamed means moving forward, like taking the next step and just living for Christ and being able to just move on from all of the stuff in your past, not disregarding it, but learning from it, like growing from the mistakes that you've made in the past and just continuing on and growing to be a better person.
Amen, Cassidy. That was amen. Yes. And with this growing on and learning from your mistakes, but continuing to get up, and even though it may be slow, even though you may be like crawling there or slowly trudging there, you're still striving for the Lord and you're still going to him. And with that, with continuing to turn to him and turn away from sin and shame, then we will be able to live authentically who we are and realize that we should not be ashamed of who we are, because who we are is children of God. We are his sons, we are his daughters, and that is the root of who we are. And once we recognize that, then we can just live this authentic and freeing life in him. I think of one of my favorite passages in the Bible. Has come to me, all you who are burdened, and I will give you rest. Shame is this burden that we have, that if we don't offer that up to the Lord, it's going to be weighing on our backs like it did for Judas. It's going to be weighing on us. But the moment that we just give that up to the Lord and say, Lord, I cannot do this without you. I am sinful and I am shameful of who I am. Please just renew my heart and help me realize that I should not be ashamed or shameful of my identity. And that is when we realize that we are his and that we are free in him. And that's the most freeing life that we can live, is that life in him.
One of the Bible passages that I have been kind of contemplating over quarantine is from John 1:38, and it's when the disciples start following Jesus, and Jesus turns around and looks at them and says, "What do you seek?" And that question is just so powerful, because what we seek says a lot about ourselves. And it's just very, like, when we're living unashamed, we're able to seek what makes us who we're supposed to be. And when we're ashamed, we tend to seek things that give us temporary happiness, that kind of blot out the sin that we committed. And this just like leads us in an endless cycle of being trapped. But when we seek the Lord and seek Jesus, we're just so freed and just so loved by God. And I don't know, that's the most like freeing thing to seek, is just love. And yeah, that is it. It makes me feel happy.
So I guess a question that we kind of want to leave with you guys is, what are you seeking? Do you want to live a life that is free, a life that is unashamed for Christ? do you want to live that life? Is that what you're seeking? Because if that's what you want and that's not what you're doing with your life, then you got to make some changes and adjustments. And that's why with this channel, what we're hoping to do is create a supportive community to realize that we will all be free if we accept that we are God's and that we are unashamed in Him. And so just know that you have a community with this YouTube channel. Even though we may not be all together and it's virtual, there's a community here. And these are people who are striving for this authenticity and for the awesomeness that it is to be free in God.
Yeah, and none of us have reached that point yet. Like, we haven't, like, I still stumble. I remember at the beginning of this last semester, I was really struggling, and it took a lot of courage to be able to go to other people and be like, I'm struggling with my faith right now. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, there's no shame in struggling. And that's the point of this community and this platform, is so that you guys can come and know that nobody's perfect. Nobody has it all together. We're all striving, but we're not there yet. And we want to get there together.
Yeah, so leave it all behind. Leave your chains of sin and shame behind and just run towards Him.
Unashamed.
Unashamed. If you guys like this video, please give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Also, if you have not watched it yet, please go check out our last video where we talk about what it means to be unashamed, and where you guys kind of get to know us a little better in a Q&A. So check that out. Also check out our website, which will be linked down low. And we hope you guys have a beautiful day. And remember, you are unashamed.
Be unashamed.
I'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.